The night my husband threw me against the kitchen counter hard enough to crack two of my ribs. Our 5-year-old son was sitting in the next room watching Bluey. I remember that detail so clearly because when I came to on the tile floor, I could still hear the theme song playing, that cheerful little melody drifting under the door while I lay there trying to remember how to breathe. His name was Brendan. We'd been married for 7 years. People ask me now, when did you know it was bad? And I always want to say, you don't know, not the way you'd think. You don't have one single moment where you look in the mirror and think, this is abuse. What you have instead is 1,000 small adjustments. You stop wearing certain colors because he says they make you look like you're trying too hard. You start timing how long you spend on the phone with your mother because he gets quiet in a particular way if it goes over 20 minutes. You learn his moods the way you learn weather patterns, the pressure dropping, the sky going that specific shade of yellow before a storm. I grew up in Sudbury, Ontario. My parents were both teachers. My mother made pierogies every Sunday, and my father coached minor hockey, and I had the kind of childhood where nothing really bad happened to you, which means nobody ever taught you what to do when it did. I met Brendan at a work conference in Ottawa. I was 26, working for a small environmental consulting firm. He was charming in the way that feels rare when you're that age, attentive, curious, the kind of man who actually listened when you talked. He remembered the name of my childhood dog. He sent flowers to my office the week after we met, not roses, but sunflowers, because I'd mentioned once that roses felt like an obligation. We got married in June, 3 years later. My mother cried during the ceremony, and my grandmother said he had kind eyes. I believed her. I believed all of it. The first time he grabbed me, really grabbed me, hard enough to leave fingerprints on my upper arm, was 8 months after our wedding. We'd been arguing about money. He thought I was spending too much on groceries. $43 over budget, he said, pulling up the receipt on his phone, reading off each item in this flat, controlled voice while I stood at the sink. I tried to explain that I'd bought extra because his parents were coming to visit. He grabbed my arm before I finished the sentence. It was over in 2 seconds. He let go immediately. His face did this thing, this collapse, where he looked genuinely horrified at himself. He apologized for 45 minutes. He cried. He said he didn't know what came over him, that it would never happen again, that he loved me more than anything in the world. I told myself it was stress. He'd just changed jobs. The move from Sudbury to Toronto had been hard on both of us. I believed that too. Our son, Charlie, was born 2 years later. By then, I had learned to be very quiet. Brendan had systems for everything. The grocery budget was $280 a week, not a cent more, despite the fact that we lived in East York and everything costs what it costs. I did all the shopping, all the cooking, all the cleaning. I'd gone part-time at work when Charlie was born because Brendan said daycare costs were unreasonable, and besides, didn't I want to be with my son? He said it like a gift, like he was doing me a favor. My paychecks went into the joint account. I had no personal account. If I needed cash for something, a coffee with a colleague, a birthday card for my mother, I asked Brendan. Sometimes he said yes. Sometimes he said, "What do you need that for?" And I would have to explain, and sometimes the explanation was good enough, and sometimes it wasn't. I know now that this is called financial abuse. I didn't have a word for it then. I just thought I was bad with money, and that it made sense for him to manage things. The hitting came and went in cycles. 6 weeks of normal, of almost good, and then something would tip and I'd spend the next few days moving carefully through my own house, watching his jaw, watching his hands, a badly cooked chicken breast, a wrong turn on the highway, Charlie crying too long after bedtime. The triggers were never consistent, which I think was the point, because it meant I was always watching, always braced, always trying to predict which version of him was going to walk through the door. I called my mother once. This was about 3 years in. Charlie was almost 1, and I'd been up most of the night with him, and I was sitting on the bathroom floor at 2 in the morning, and I just needed to hear her voice. I told her things weren't great. I used those words exactly. Things aren't great. My mother said, Every marriage has rough patches, sweetheart. She said, your father and I went through some very hard years in our 30s. She said, the first few years with a baby are genuinely brutal. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't know what I wasn't saying. I stopped trying to tell people after that. The night of the ribs was a Thursday in February. I know it was a Thursday because Charlie had swimming lessons on Thursdays and I hadn't been able to take him because I could barely stand up straight. I told my husband I thought I needed to go to the hospital. He said, you're fine. You're being dramatic. Put some ice on it. He slept in our bed. I spent the night on the couch with a bag of frozen peas pressed to my side, timing my breaths to keep them shallow. I didn't go to the hospital. I was afraid of what they would ask me. The break came on a Tuesday in April, 3 months later. I don't mean it came from me. I mean it came from Charlie. My son was 5 years old. He was in junior kindergarten at the school 4 blocks from our house. He had a stuffed elephant named Gerald. He'd named it himself after some book character, and he slept with it every night and carried it to the cars on Saturday mornings. He loved dinosaurs and hated loud noises and had recently become very passionate about whether or not his sandwich was cut diagonally versus straight across. He was 5. He was my whole world, and I had spent 5 years trying to protect him from what was happening in our house by pretending it wasn't happening. That Tuesday, my husband came home from work in a state I recognized immediately. There was something stiff in his shoulders, something too controlled in the way he set down his bag. I started moving toward the kitchen, trying to get ahead of it somehow, to have dinner on the table, and Charlie settled and everything calm before whatever was building in him reached the surface. I didn't make it. He started on the drive home, he said. The 401 was backed up all the way from the 427, and he'd had a terrible day, and nobody ever thought about how much pressure he was under. I kept nodding. I kept saying, I know, I'm sorry. Charlie was sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book, and I kept glancing at him, trying to signal with my eyes that he should go to his room, but he was 5. He didn't understand signals. Then Brendan picked up the phone bill. It was sitting on the counter, already opened. He'd opened it himself that morning. He said, you called your sister 11 times last month. I said, she's been going through a hard time. He said, what kind of hard time needs 11 phone calls? I said her name, my sister's name, Paulette, and something about what she'd been dealing with, a difficult pregnancy, her husband working up north, and I watched Brendan's face while I talked, and I could see him deciding something. I could see the moment he stopped listening. He threw the phone bill at me. Then he moved around the counter fast, and I backed up, and my hip caught the edge of the counter, and I went down hard onto the kitchen floor. And Charlie looked up from his coloring book. I don't know what he saw exactly. I don't know what a 5-year-old processes in a moment like that. But I know what he did. He got down from his chair very quietly. He walked to the hallway where we kept a small table with the house phone on it, the landline we barely used anymore that we'd kept because I'd insisted, some instinct I couldn't name at the time. He picked it up. Brendan didn't notice. He was standing over me saying something. I couldn't follow the words anymore, and then he left the room. I heard him go upstairs. Charlie came back to the kitchen. He was holding the phone. He said, Mommy, I called Grandpa. I stared at him. He said, I told him you fell down and you needed help. My father was there in 40 minutes. He lives in Etobicoke, 45 minutes on a good day, but he made it in 40. He later told me he ran 3 red lights and didn't care. When he knocked on the door, Brendan answered it. I was still in the kitchen, sitting on the floor with my back against the cabinet, and Charlie pressed against my side. I heard my father's voice. I heard Brendan's voice, smooth and sociable, saying, Oh, hi, we weren't expecting you. What a nice surprise. I heard my father say, very quietly, I need to see my daughter. He came into the kitchen. He took one look at me. His face did something I had never seen it do before, this collapse and then this hardening, like water turning to ice. He didn't say anything to Brendan. He didn't look at him. He just crouched down next to me and said, Can you walk? I said yes. He said, Then we're going to get your coat and Charlie's coat and we're going to walk out of this house together. Okay? I said, I can't just, He said, "Yes, you can." We left. I didn't take anything except Charlie's backpack that was already by the door, the one he took to school every day with Gerald the elephant inside it, because it was a school day tomorrow and I had packed it the night before. I took that bag and I took Charlie's hand, and my father walked behind us, and we got into his car and he drove us to my parents' house in Etobicoke. I slept in my childhood bedroom that night. Charlie slept next to me with Gerald tucked under his arm. I lay in the dark, listening to him breathe, and I thought about all the Tuesdays before this one. My parents didn't push me to talk that night. My mother made chamomile tea and set it on the nightstand and kissed me on the forehead and turned off the light. My father sat in the hallway for a while. I could see the line of light under the door. In the morning, my mother made oatmeal and put maple syrup on it the way she did when I was small. Charlie ate 2 bowls. Then she took him to the backyard to look for early crocuses pushing through the snow, which is a thing she does every April, and while they were outside, I sat at the kitchen table with my father, and I told him everything. It took a long time. There was a lot of stopping and starting. My father is not a man who cries easily. He cried that morning. He kept his hands flat on the table, very still, and he listened. And sometimes he closed his eyes, and twice he had to get up and stand at the window for a minute before coming back to sit down. When I was done, he said, "I need you to know that none of this is your fault. I had been waiting to hear that for 6 years. I didn't know until that moment that I'd been waiting." My father called a friend of his that afternoon, a woman named Constance who works in family law in Toronto. She met with me 2 days later in her office on Yonge Street, and she was the first person who used the words out loud in the right order: financial abuse, coercive control, physical violence. She asked me if I had documentation of anything. I said no, not really. She said that was okay, that it was common, and that we could work with what we had. What we had turned out to be more than I thought. Charlie's school had flagged some of his behavior over the winter. He had started flinching at loud noises which his teacher had noted in her observations. My family doctor had a record of the rib visit, even though I hadn't gone to emergency, because I had finally gone to my GP a week later, and she had written it down without me asking her to, had written the words, "Patient presented with rib pain, consistent with blunt force trauma, patient denies fall," in her notes. And I hadn't even known she'd done that until Constance asked me to request my file. That doctor may have saved my legal case. I never got to thank her properly. I think about her sometimes. The financial piece was complicated because everything was in Brendan's name or in joint accounts. Constance explained that this was common in financial abuse situations and that it didn't mean I was entitled to nothing. In Ontario, matrimonial property law doesn't work that way. My years at home, the reduction in my income, the career I had effectively paused, all of that factored in. It took a long time, and it was not a clean process, and there were months where I sat in Constance's office and could not stop shaking, but the law, in the end, was on my side in ways I hadn't expected. Brendan fought it. Of course he did. He was charming to everyone, to the mediators, to the assessors, to anyone who entered the process. He sent me a long email 3 weeks after my father took me out of that house, saying that he loved me and that he was getting help and that what happened between us was a result of stress and that I was taking his son from him. He used the phrase, "We can fix this," 4 times. I didn't respond. Constance said I didn't have to, and I didn't. There was one moment, about 5 months in, when I came very close to going back. I don't say this to be dramatic. It is just the truth about what happens when you leave. The rental apartment was small, and Charlie was having nightmares, and my savings from the settlement hadn't come through yet, and I was working full-time again and exhausted, and some part of me thought, at least I knew what the life looked like. At least it was familiar. I called my sister Paulette. It was 11:30 at night. She was up with her newborn, and she answered on the first ring. I said, "I think I might call him." She didn't say, "Don't you dare." She didn't say, "After everything he did to you." She said, "Tell me what's making tonight hard," and she stayed on the phone with me until 1 in the morning, and by the time I hung up, I had not called him, and I never came that close again. The divorce was finalized 14 months after the night my father drove us to Etobicoke. I got the settlement. I got primary custody of Charlie, with supervised access for Brendan, pending a report from the Office of the Children's Lawyer. My mother came with me to the courthouse the day it was made final. We sat in the parking lot of a Tim Hortons on the way home and drank double doubles, and she held my hand over the gear shift, and we didn't say much. We didn't need to. Charlie is 7 now. He still has Gerald. He doesn't flinch at loud noises anymore, or at least not the way he did. He's in grade 2, and he has a best friend named Wyatt, and he goes to hockey on Saturday mornings in a rink that smells like cold air and rubber. And when I watch him through the glass, red-cheeked, concentrating, the way children concentrate on things they love, I feel something that is not quite happiness and not quite grief, but something in between, some ache that also holds gratitude in it. He saved my life. He was 5 years old, and he picked up a phone and called the one person he knew would come, and he saved my life. I tell him I love him every single day. I tell him he is brave. I don't tell him yet what he did, the full weight of it. He will know someday when he's old enough to carry it. For now, he just knows that we live in a new apartment with a balcony where we're growing tomatoes this summer, and that Grandpa comes for dinner on Sundays, and that Auntie Paulette's baby girl has learned to grab his finger, and that Mom is okay. I am okay. That is not a small thing to be able to say. There is a shelter in Toronto. I won't say which one, because they depend on discretion, but I have been going there on Wednesday evenings for about 8 months now. I don't go as a client. I go as a volunteer to sit in a room with women who are in the place I was in and to say the things that were hard for me to hear at the time, but that I needed someone to say. It was a mistake. It's not your fault. You don't have to have a black eye for it to account. The law can protect you even when it feels like it can't. Your children need you safe more than they need the house, the routine, the version of normal that is actually not normal at all. None of this looks the way it does in the movies. There is no single moment where the music swells and you find your strength. It is a Tuesday in April when your 5-year-old picks up the phone. It is your father crouching down on a kitchen floor and saying, "Can you walk?" It is your sister staying on the phone until 1 in the morning. It is a doctor who wrote something down without being asked. It is small and specific and ordinary, all the things that save you. If you are in it right now, if you are reading this or listening to this and you recognize something in what I've said, I want you to know that I am not going to tell you what to do. I know better than that. I know how many things have to line up, how much it costs to leave, how complicated the love can be, even when the person you love is hurting you. But I want you to know that there are people who will come. There are laws that exist in your name. There are doctors who write things down. There are shelters with staff who will meet you without judgment at whatever hour you arrive. In Ontario, the Assaulted Women's Helpline is available 24 hours a day in over 200 languages. They have helped more than 500,000 women. You would not be the first call they answered tonight. You are not alone in this house, and if you have a child watching from the doorway, I want you to hear this. They are not better off in a home where you are afraid. They just aren't. I know it feels like staying is protecting them. I thought that for 6 years. I was wrong. I am telling you this as someone who lay on a kitchen floor while Bluey played in the next room. I am telling you this as someone who is growing tomatoes on a balcony now. Both of those things are true. One does not cancel out the other. That's what healing actually looks like.